Welcome back to Black Swan Outdoors, and today is going to be more of a discussion video than anything. So I really apologize that this video is going to be boring because there's not going to be a lot of movement. You're not going to see my hands moving around. You're not going to see a lot of things moving in front of the screen because we're going to talk about knife safety. I often think about, well, what could I contribute that's different that people are not talking about in kind of the outdoor community and knife community and so on, and bushcraft area. And I think one of the things there's never talked about, which I think is extremely important, is safety around your tools. So I'm going to talk specifically knives, but what I'm talking about kind of goes well with axes and saws and things like that. So before you, I've put just some eye candy out in front of you, just some knives, just to give you a little bit of some props and whatnot. But really, this video is really going to kind of focus in on this concept of safety and the safety rules. I've got a list of rules that I kind of wrote down that I think are really important, that we could kind of talk about. And I don't think that this is this is an exhaustive list by any means. Hopefully I didn't miss anything. So if I did, please put that down below in the comments if you think that there's something maybe you could add to this list. So first and foremost, and this might be, I hope this doesn't sound like I'm talking down to anybody, but I think knives, primarily a knife is a tool, and it should be approached as a tool. It's not a toy. If I was doing a video on firearms, that was one of my big pet peeves on firearms, and the firearm community basically treats guns like toys these days, especially on YouTube, which is really kind of annoying. But I think you see a lot of that mentality also with knives too. Not so much, but really knives can be enjoyable. They can be things that you can collect, but they really can't be toys, and they can't be treated as such. So things like throwing them is ridiculous. Like throwing a knife is just, it doesn't have any utility. There's no value to that. Obviously, if you have a throwing knife, that's different. So it's not a toy. So when you're looking at using a knife, before you start using it, you need to think about the people in your area and yourself in terms of safety. So one of the things that I do is I take a knife and I just extend my arm out, and if there's anybody within that reach of where I'm going to be using the knife, from the sides of my body to the front, I'm going to check that area. If you're teaching kids knife safety, one thing you could do, it's always kind of fun, is just you call it the blood circle, and that's something that kids are going to remember, and adults too. It's kind of a gruesome, not mnemonic device, but memory device that you can use. Of course, you're always going to want to cut away. I think that's pretty standard. Most people know that. But I think that when you get into bushcraft, and you see a lot of people doing different types of knife techniques, that you'll notice that sometimes people do have to break that rule. So we'll do some kind of knife handling videos where we'll talk about that. But generally speaking, you're going to want to always cut away from your body. Next is, I would say, is you want to focus on lots of smaller cuts instead of big cuts. I see a lot of times, especially newer people that are into carving or bushcraft, trying to get deep cuts or really big cuts, or they're trying to make, huge, either feather sticks too. And it really doesn't serve much of a purpose. And what it does is it creates the conditions in which you can lose control of that knife. So certainly smaller cuts is going to be much, much better. This one's an obvious maybe, but you want to make sure that your hands and the knife itself is dry. I've had this situation too where you've got blood in your hands or snow or whatever, and you're trying to cut your knife. Just to take a few minutes just to make sure that the handle and your hands are dry as possible before you operate the knife. I think that's really kind of important. And again, this might be something real simple like cutting away, but you also want to make sure that that knife is sharp. So before you actually even use the knife, you should test it out to see if it's sharp. If you don't have a piece of paper to slice, which is a great way to do that, what I do is I just very carefully take the blade and put it on my fingernail. And if it's a sharp knife, it's a really sharp knife, you're going to feel that resistance into that fingernail. You don't even have to cut into your fingernail. You're going to feel that blade cut into that knife, into your fingernail, and catch there. And that is a sharp knife. You don't have to run it across your hands to say, oh, look, it's, you know, this is hair popping sharp. Okay, well, that's great. You can see I can do that, but it serves no purpose and it's dangerous. And now I just got a patch of hair off my skin. So test that it's sharp, making sure your hands are dry, cut away from yourself. Don't use a dull blade. You know, I think that's pretty standard. Most people kind of know that one. The one thing that bothers the shit out of me when I see people doing testing videos is they start doing stress tests and they start jabbing the tip into and prying with their tip. And it's like, that doesn't serve any function. No one does that. You shouldn't have to do that. I mean, yeah, maybe in some obscure survival situation, you dig into a log to, you know, get grubs, or you got to harvest some, you know, tinder or fungus for tinder. But I mean, really, stay off the tip and don't pry on it. It doesn't really. I just don't think that it's a very good use of, or a good test to test the rigidity of a knife. Just in my opinion. And again, I could be wrong. And just prying with a knife in general is just a dumb idea. There's tools for that. Obviously, you're gonna have to break those situation in a survival situation or whatever, but that's not average use. And that's kind of what I'm trying to drive at here. The second thing here is that you want to make sure that when you're passing the knife or you're walking with the knife, it's put away. So, you know, I'm going to close the knife and I'm going to hand it to somebody closed, not open. If I have a sheath, well, you know, preferably I'm going to want to sheath the knife and give that to somebody. If that's not available, I'm going to hand them the knife with holding on to the handle. They can hold it and grab the other handle. And that way I'm in control of the knife. I know where the blade is. It's much more safe. The same with, you know, an axe. If I'm going to need to carry the axe, I'm going to carry it like this with the blade away from my body. So if I trip and fall, I'm not going to fall on the axe, and that it's nice and safe from other people as well. But my preference would be to mask the knife and then carry it, and still controlling the head, or passing the axe to somebody like this, upside down, and where the blade is not going to injure somebody. So I think that's really important. It's like running with scissors, right? You know, you don't want to run with scissors. So you don't want to do the same kind of behavior with a tool that's even sharper and more dangerous than a pair of scissors. Next thing I would say is live trees. Anything live with a knife just makes no sense to me, to be taking down live trees. There's a lot of bushcraft videos and people out there doing stuff like that, and it's like, it just drives me up the wild. It just drives me wild to see all this really bad behavior. You know, especially you want to teach kids not to be, you know, stabbing live things, and that's trees and animals and such. So maybe that's a pretty elementary point for most people, but unfortunately you see a lot of people, you know, throwing knives into live trees, which to me is not that much different than carving your name in it. You know, whatever. I just think that, yeah, stay away from live things with your tools. Never carry open. We talked about that. Never throw. Yeah, I think that pretty much covers it. What rules do you have, or what safety precautions do you put in when your tools? Oh, last thing that I never see on videos: safety glasses are so important when you're chopping, especially when you're using a knife, and gloves as well. you know, I can go back and forth on gloves myself, depending on the use and whatnot. I think you could argue, but I think in general, wearing gloves is going to be very, very beneficial. And I wear gloves. If I'm in a wilderness environment and I have an axe, I'm wearing gloves and I'm wearing eye protection of some kind. Because the last thing I want to do is get a chip of something in my eye, a chip of wood or whatever, and the last thing I want to do is hurt my hands. You know, I'm certainly going to do that. I carry gloves and safety glasses in the wilderness, and I have no idea why there's these expert YouTubers that using woods tools and they don't have safety gear on. I mean, that's especially if they're teaching wilderness skills, where you're in a remote area, you don't have access to a hospital, you've got to hike out. How, you know, it's just that much more challenging to do that when you cut your finger off or you've, you know, got something in your eye. But I don't know, maybe I'm getting preachy. So personal protection, you know, if you've got closed-toed shoes, I think that's important if you're using an axe as well. Long pants is preferable. But yeah, I mean, I think it's just, you know, the main thing is being focused on what you're doing, and not being too tired, not being too wet or hypothermic, and not being too hungry and stressed. And, you know, use those tools in an appropriate mind frame and a clear head. With that, I'll let you guys go. Hopefully you like this movie or this little video, and stay tuned for more.